Hello again. We have lots and lots of people still joining us, but in the interest of time, we're going to go ahead and get started. So, welcome to Grief in a Pandemic, Practical Tips for Caring for the Bereaved. As you know, this webinar, our monthly webinars, are brought to you by a collaboration of wonderful sponsors. We have O'Connor Mortuary, Alzheimer's Orange County, Irvine Clinical Research, Care Choices, Hospice and Palliative Services, and Caring Companions at Home. And my name is Kim Bailey, and I'm a program and education specialist at Alzheimer's Orange County, and I'm delighted to be your host today. Our sponsors gather monthly to provide these webinars as a service to the community on topics of interest to anyone who cares for or who is working in the older adult community. And we know that you'll find today's presentation informative and useful. Our speaker is Becky Lamaka from O'Connor Mortuary, and I'm going to be telling you a little bit about her in just a few minutes. But before I do that, and while so many people are still joining us, let me take a few minutes just to go over the requirements for receiving your CE today, and also just some basic information for all of us who are on the webinar today. And with that, I want to go ahead and tell you a little bit about our wonderful speaker today, Becky Lamaka from O'Connor Mortuary. So Becky is the Director of Grief Support and Education at O'Connor Mortuary. She has a bachelor's degree in psychology and her master's is in counseling psychology. And she also holds a certificate in thanatology. Oh, I knew I was going to say that wrong. Thanatology. Sorry, Becky. Becky is an expert in the field of death and bereavement with 2 decades in nonprofit senior care before joining O'Connor Mortuary in 2013. She serves on the board of directors for the Association for Death Education and Counseling, which is the international professional organization dedicated to promoting excellence and recognizing diversity in death education, care of the dying, grief counseling, and research in thanatology. Sorry, Becky, I should have practiced that word, and I'm sure you'll tell us a little more about that. She also serves on the Trust Institute Committee for Selected Independent Educational Trust, whose focus is to bridge the educational gap between mortuary science school and on-the-job training. Locally, she serves on the board of directors for Newport Mesa Irvine Interfaith Council, the advisory council for the Trauma Intervention Team, otherwise known as TIP, and is past board chair for the Hearts and Hopes Family Grief Center. Becky is passionate about educating the community on how to deal with death and the journey of grief after loss. Her true passion lies in normalizing the grief experience and helping to create a world in which grief is embraced, understood, and respected. And now I'll ask Becky to join us and present her topic to us. And Becky, we're so glad to welcome you and have you share your notable expertise with us. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Kim. I know, thanatology, right? You know, my kids used to tease me when they were little, like we would go to a store and they would have all of the different ornaments for, you know, if you're a nurse or a teacher, they're always like, we bet they don't have your ornament, Mom. So thanatology, it's a fancy word for a death educator. Thank you, Kim, and thank you everybody for being with us today. Our topic is grief in pandemic and practical tips for caring for the bereaved. And I want to let you all know we're going to talk a lot about coming alongside others, but this is really going to be 45 minutes to an hour of really also examining our own grief and our own losses that we've experienced over this past year. So here are some things that we want to focus on that I'm hoping that you get out of today's workshop. We want to identify normal grief, and what does that mean, and how does grief look more complicated today due to the pandemic? We want to learn about methods to help individuals cope with loss, disappointment, and the stress and anxiety that comes along with loss. To develop strategies to support others when traditional interpersonal strategies and our old way of doing things just aren't possible. And then really important for all of you listening today, utilize self-care strategies to maintain personal well-being as a caregiver. So what is grief? I will tell you, closure isn't a thing in grief. Closure is not a thing in grief. So many people think that grief is a finite process with a beginning and then with an end. But every grieving person will tell you that the ache never goes away. The love you have for that person never goes away. And grief means learning how to love someone despite their physical absence. If you haven't experienced it, it can be really hard to understand all the ways that grief can alter your life and the sense of yourself. Grief is a natural response to loss, and it's an unavoidable part of our life. Even in things that we consider to be good, grief is present. So think about when we graduate or when we retire. We're looking forward to what is to come, yet there's that little piece of us that grieves what we're leaving behind. When we get married, it's the excitement of becoming a twosome, yet there's a little part of us that might grieve that single life that we're leaving behind. When a baby is born, we're celebrating this beautiful life that is starting out in this world, yet we may be grieving the changes that this new little being will bring to our lives. So when we think of it this way, all grief is so unique, and these griefs are very different than grieving a death. Yet when we acknowledge that grief is interwoven into so many aspects of our life and so many of our life experiences, it can make it less foreign and hopefully help you be a little more comfortable when you encounter grief because of a death loss. So normal grief gets complicated. Boy, oh boy, has this year ever been complicated for every single one of us. So of course we have COVID-19, we have the pandemic. On top of the pandemic, we have experienced fires here. We've had civil unrest, we've had riots, we've had protests, we've had a very contentious election. All of this, what I just talked about is normal grief that we all experience. And this past year has taken our grief and added layers and layers and layers of complication. So we're going to talk a little bit about this. We're going to talk about grief in general, and we're going to talk about how grief is just a little bit different over this past year. So what makes grief so hard right now? Well, this year has made grief an unwelcome guest. COVID-19 stole our moments, stole our togetherness, stole our ability to be close with those we love, stole our ability sometimes to be with our people as they're dying. So many people left struggling with too many losses, struggling to make really difficult decisions, struggling to process so much that has been taken away from us. Yet we've carried on and we've done what we can within our power to alleviate suffering. And so many of you on this call today, you are caregivers, and you've done everything within your power to alleviate suffering, to support, to assist, to do our jobs. All of our jobs have looked very different this past year, but to do our jobs, yet our resilience has come at a high price. So we talked a little bit about all of those things, what makes grief so complicated and so hard right now. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about grief beyond death loss. I mean, so many non-death losses can cause so much distress and difficulty in our daily functioning. And all of us, whether we've experienced a death loss or not, have experienced these non-death losses this year. Losing a friend, injury, illness, loss of job, maybe not even loss of job, but just shifting from working to a home environment versus going into the office every day. Loss of hopes and dreams, infertility, missing milestones, that's been such a huge thing, missing graduations, birthdays, people having to postpone weddings, mental illness, addiction, trauma, relocation, breakups, divorces, and then of course social distancing. All of these losses are significant, and they add to the complexity of our grief. So this has been one of my favorite quotes over the past 10, 11 months. The expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet. I mean, I think that is really been my mantra the past almost year. Just how can we expect ourselves as caregivers, as those walking alongside the bereaved, not to experience these very emotions ourselves? So how do we face our grief when our world seems so out of control? We're going to talk about self-care a little bit later in the presentation. And one of the things that I do is I have the Headspace app on my phone. And I'll take a few minutes to do a breathing exercise or a meditation. And it's just part of my self-care practice. And there was a great quote on Headspace the other day, and it said, "Peace of mind is experienced only after making peace with your mind." And I thought, simple, but so powerful. Loss causes anxiety. And so many are experiencing anxiety and even trauma due to this constant change that we've been in over close to a year. So how do we manage this? Anxiety is a killer. And anxiety, which loss causes anxiety. Anxiety is fueled by future projection. So how do we control this anxiety? How do we ease this anxiety? Well, one thing we can do is we can actually step outside of the frame. So what I need to do, what we all need to do is we focus on what energy do I need to focus on? And that's what can I do at the moment versus giving power to projecting into the future. The projecting does not benefit me. What can I focus on the here and now to do what I need to do? We can't control what's going to happen next. We certainly have seen that over the past several months. Worrying about it won't affect anything other than distracting me from the task at hand, wasting my mental energy, compromising my courage, undermining my motivation, and slowing my pace. So as hard as it is, what I need to do is I need to again step outside of that frame, and when I feel that anxiety, focus on what can I do at this moment, really focusing on today. We need to ground ourselves when we've lost our assumptive world. And that's something that we see is very commonplace with people who are grieving. We've lost our assumptive world. What was no longer is. And it's something that the pandemic, that this past year has had us all feeling. You know, the world is spiraling out of control. You know, who on this call was not looking forward to January 1, 2021? You know, we needed to get that year 2020 behind us. It hasn't been a magic pill. 2021 has still brought difficulties, has still brought challenges, yet there was something about focusing and stepping outside of that frame and that mind shift. So finding that grounding when we lose our assumptive world, finding something that's nurturing to you. You know, what may work for me may not work for you. And so it's like our grief. Our grief is very unique. What works for you to stay in that present moment, to stay grounded, whether it's mindfulness techniques, relaxation techniques, prayer. Think about what you can do to control what you can and let go of the rest, even if it's just for a brief moment in time. You know, one of the things that I work with our team here at O'Connor Mortuary, because of the fast-paced environment and on the go, and the sheer increase in the number of deaths that we've seen, particularly over the last couple of months. You know, it's very important for them to focus on what they can do in the here and now. So something I have them practice, and all of you can do it right this moment. It literally takes probably not even 10 seconds. Unclench your jaw. Unclench your jaw, relax your shoulders, relax your forehead, and take a breath. Those 4 things I don't even think took 10 seconds, yet it automatically grounds you. And you feel it. You don't realize how throughout the day we're clenching that jaw, we're furrowing that brow. Just taking a moment to reset yourself can make such a big difference. And I want to spend some time talking about leaning into our grief. So grief is hard. That's why we call it grief work. It's messy. It's hard. It feels terrible. We don't like it. Yet, as I said at the beginning, there's no closure in grief. It's not a finite process that one day it just ends. So I want to talk a little bit about sitting with discomfort. And this is something we can do for ourselves. This is something we can do with others too, for those of us who are coming alongside people who are grieving, people who are bereaved. So we really have 2 different paths that we can look at. So I feel something. It's uncomfortable. So I choose to numb. I numb it. Many ways we can numb it. You know, I'm going to shut it aside. I'm going to pretend like it doesn't exist. I'm going to drink a bottle of wine. I'm going to, you know, eat that gallon of ice cream, whatever it may be. I numb. And then what happens? The feeling persists. Or what if I feel something? It's uncomfortable. I don't like it. I resist it. But I acknowledge my resistance. I notice my resistance. I acknowledge my feelings without labeling them, not good or not bad, just it is. It is what I'm feeling at the moment. My body relaxes. I feel the sensations, and then the feeling passes. So think about that. The very thing that we tend to do is we want to turn ourselves away from it. We want to block it off. We don't want to feel it because it's painful. But yet the very process of allowing ourselves to feel this is what actually helps us through it. Which leads me into tuning into the good while avoiding toxic positivity. It's kind of a new buzzword. Some of you may have heard quite a bit about toxic positivity. So really, toxic positivity is promoting the idea or the goal that no matter what the circumstance, you should always and only maintain a positive and happy and optimistic mindset. So as a griever, I'm sure some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. So no matter what your loss, no matter the devastating grief aftermath, no matter the pain and the suffering you're feeling, you've probably heard plenty of people encourage you, and well-meaning people encouraging you to, you know what, stay positive. You're going to make it. Focus on gratitude. Look on the bright side. Pretty soon it's going to get better. So toxic positivity in grief encourages us to ignore or deny the things that are hard, that are painful, that are overwhelming, that are confusing, that are difficult. It says, ignore the storm and focus on the rainbow, right? It's raining, but focus on the rainbow. And if you don't see the rainbow, well, pretend like you do. And if you pretend long enough and you pretend hard enough, you're finally going to see the rainbow appear. And if it doesn't appear, well, then you probably weren't trying hard enough. So that does nothing but destroy the griever. Toxic positivity in grief tells us that grief is a dirty word, and our goal should be to put a smile on our face and get back to normal, whatever normal may be. But when you stop and think about that, that is such an unrealistic task, an unreasonable task to ask a grieving person to do. It's like you're asking somebody to repeat and believe something when there's clear evidence to the contrary. Life is great. And we just want to scream, life is not great. My husband is dead. My child is dead. My person is no longer here. Life is not good. Life is not great. But positivity in grief, you see that first benefit finding, not toxic positivity, but positivity in grief does just the opposite. It allows you to say, you know what? My life has been shattered. My life is not the way I wanted it. This is not what I expected. This is not what I hoped for. But it doesn't mean that I will never be joyful again, that I'll never find meaning, or I'll never find purpose again. Though that benefit finding, that positivity in our grief allows us to say sometimes we can feel both hopeless and hopeful all at once. I hope that makes sense. We can feel hopeless and hopeful all at the same time. We can say, I have total moments of despair, yet I can find a small moment of gratitude in this horrible mess. It has us able to say, I have no idea how I'm still surviving, but I'm grateful that I opened my eyes this morning. I'm grateful that I stepped out of bed. And you know what? I'm going to do it again tomorrow. So positivity in our grief doesn't ask us to deny our problems, yet also allows us to see that there are some moments of gratitude, there are some moments of joy. And I'll say it, and I will say it 100 times again over the next few minutes that we have left with each other. Emotions aren't good or bad, they just are. And that's so important in our grief journey. We can be in the depths of despair, yet we can have a happy memory that brings joy to our face, smile to our face. It was so interesting. We had a family here for a visitation and small service in our chapel. And the funeral director was sharing with me, she was standing outside of the door of our chapels here, and she could hear crying, and then she could hear moments of laughter and then more crying. And that's really what this benefit finding is all about. It's crucial to allow ourselves to experience all of our feelings, the hardest ones and the easiest ones. It's important that we feel those and express those emotions. And as the person coming alongside the grieving, being the person who allows us to do that. So not being the one who tells us to stop being so negative, but allows us to feel everything. Beautiful quote here by William Shakespeare. Give grief words. We tell our stories so we can heal. If you take away anything from today, we tell our stories so we can heal. Be that safe harbor and allow people to share with you. Even better, share your favorite story. You know, when my brother died, I remember so many people coming out of the woodwork and sharing these wonderful stories with me. It was so amazing to hear stories from people from other parts of his life, people that I didn't know, and learning that side of my brother, you know, stories that I had heard from his colleagues and coworkers that were new to me. And I think we're so afraid sometimes to allow people to tell their story. Why? Because we don't want to make them sad, right? We don't want to make them cry. We don't want to upset them, or maybe to share a favorite memory or story of their person with them in fear that will upset them. Know that even if it may bring tears to somebody's eyes, that's a gift to them. The ability to have that story and to be able to share that story of that person's life, of that person's death, is so rich and so valuable to people who are grieving. And words have power. I want to talk just a little bit about grief shaming. We hear about all sorts of other shaming right now. There's body shaming and there's all of this. Well, grief shaming is a thing. It's a term identified by Megan Devine, who is a psychotherapist. And she talks about it, she describes it as the act of dismissing or downplaying another person's grief experience. So I like to talk about like starting those sentences off with "at least." You know, yeah, I'm downplaying the other person's grief experience. If a friend has a miscarriage and I say, well, at least you know you can have children, or at least you have other children. The act of comparing grief experiences, you know, at least you can remarry. I'll never be able to replace my son. The act of judging how someone does grief. What? You're going out of the house already? What? I can't believe you took your wedding ring off so soon. Oh, I can't believe that you've moved all of the clothes out of the closet, or I can't believe it's been 2 years and you still have all of her clothes in her closet. This isn't good. This does not help anybody. Rather, if you don't know what to say, just say, I'm here. You know, these are beautiful suggestions. I'm here for you. Even though I don't know exactly what you're going through, or even though I don't always have the right words, I'm here. I'm going to do for you. Give me your grocery list. I'm going to the store. I'm going to bring you back your groceries. Give me your laundry. I'm going to go wash it, dry it, and leave it on your doorstep. I'm here. I don't know exactly what you're going through. I may not have the right words. I can't fix it for you. I can't make it better, but I'm here. And even more than words, the power of presence. You know, if you're supporting someone who's grieving, please let go of your assumption that eventually your person is going to return to normal. Avoid pressuring them to get back to their old self. Their old self no longer exists. No matter how good your intentions may be, this approach to grief support does not bring comfort. It only brings frustration, shame, and pain. Instead of trying to fix their grief or help the grieving person return to his or her former state, let them know you'll be there for them as they work to discover the new version of who they are now that grief has touched their life in such a profound way. And really encourage others to be honest in their grief. So many times in grief, we tell ourselves, that we need to ignore the difficult stuff. You know, we kind of talked about that earlier about allowing ourselves to feel all the feelings and not labeling them as good or bad. But we tell ourselves, you know, I need to ignore the difficult stuff. I just need to focus on the positive. I just need to put one foot in front of the other. I need to move forward. And we may try to distract our grieving friends, family members away from the hard emotions. Oh, let's go watch that. Let's watch that favorite movie on Netflix, or I'm going to drop this off for you, or, you know, I'm going to do these things to distract, to help you feel better, right? Looking for ways to keep busy. Sometimes in our grief, we might become hyper aware of focusing on gratitude and growth and strength. I think that the key here is balance. We're going to have good moments, we're going to have bad moments. And I think it's important to know that this is throughout our grief journey. Just how we talked about closure isn't a thing, our grief never ends. We can be doing fine for weeks, for days, for months. We could be doing fine for years. And then something brings it all flooding right back to us. So listen for that voice in yourself and listen for that voice in others that might be pushing them to avoid and to push back a little. I do want to say, for those of you who are caregivers for somebody with cognitive impairment, somebody with dementia, with Alzheimer's, who may have limited verbal communication, be really careful that you're listening and looking for cues. They're not always going to be able to verbalize, you know, I'm feeling anxious right now. But yet look for those nonverbal clues that that may help you think, oh my gosh, there's a lot of anxiety right here associated with this loss. And then find ways to console, find ways to focus in the present moment, and reduce the overstimulation. And those of you who have employees or volunteers, you know, be aware of your grieving clients, your grieving employees, your grieving volunteers. Just because we have 3 days of bereavement that most of our companies give us doesn't mean that when we come back to work, everything's going to be okay. So just be aware, be noticing of that. Again, we can't fix it, we can't take it away, yet we can listen and look for those cues. And just the fact that you acknowledge is such a great help to those who are stepping back into a volunteer or an employment situation as they are grieving. And remind the grieving that there's not only space for the hard stuff or the positive stuff, but we're most honest and we're most human when we feel both. That's a part of life. We feel both. That's leaning into those hard emotions and leaning into that grief, as hard as it is. It's okay to feel both, and it's human to feel both. And then when all else fails, if you have not watched Inside Out, the Pixar movie, I think it's, gosh, probably 7, 8 years old. Watch the Pixar movie, Inside Out. It reminds us that we all need to feel all of our feelings. Another thing, as we're encouraging others to be honest in their grief, is it's really common for grievers to want to stay in that kind of deep, dark pain. And I know it sounds weird. I know you're thinking, but why, you know, it's a horrible feeling. We want to move out of this. Why would somebody, or maybe it's you, why do I want to stay in this dark place and feel this deep, deep pain that I'm feeling due to this loss? Well, sometimes we think our pain is the only thing that connects us to our loved one. And it isn't. There's so much more. But sometimes we think our pain is the only reminder to us and to those around us about how important our person's life was and how much that person means to me. So sometimes we can start to feel comfortable in that pain. So in these instances, we kind of want to buck against all positivity, not just the toxic positivity, but we're bucking against all positivity. You know, I can't find joy in my life right now because I'm grieving. And we think if we acknowledge the positivity, it means that we're forgetting our loss. And why do we not want to forget our loss? Because we don't want to forget our person. That's the biggest fear of a grieving person. I don't want the world to forget that this person who I love so deeply and care so much about doesn't exist anymore. I don't want to lose that connection. So we remember that positivity and pain can live side by side. It's that benefit finding, right? Neither cancels out the other. So in finding hope, in being aware of those moments of gratitude or positivity, we realize that it does not in any way take away the significance of our loved one's life, of our loved one's death, or of our grief. But instead, that positivity allows us to know that we bring our loved one with us on our grief journey as we move forward into this new life of meaning and hope and of purpose. So that's so important for us. Those of you who are grieving, those of you who are walking us alongside grievers, help them realize that it's not black and white. There are shades of gray, and we can do both. And by doing both, by leaning in, we're actually bringing that person and that memory and the essence of that individual along with us as we integrate this loss into our lives. I want to talk a little bit about self-care. All of us on this call, whether, and if you have experienced a death loss this past year, my condolences to you. I know it has caused so much additional grief, so much layering upon layering of different things as we've grieved death losses this year. For all of you on the call, even if you have not experienced a death loss, I know you have experienced losses in what the pandemic has brought to our world. And I know so many of you on this call are caregivers. And we define who we are. We define ourselves as part of it is through the service that we do, right? The service that we give to others. And we've had to alter that this past year. We've had to do things differently. And I want to reinforce that self-care is a necessity always. So instead of when I feel like I need it, by then it's like drinking the water. They say if when you drink water, you're thirsty and you drink water, you're already dehydrated. When you say to yourself, I need to take better care of myself, you're already way past due. And that compassion begins with self-compassion. Compassion begins with self-compassion. So find moments of stillness in your busy, hectic days and replenish yourself. I love this quote. I know the image isn't, I'm going to move my screen just a little so I can see the whole thing. I know this image is a little blurry, yet I mean, again, one of my mantras over the past several months. Self-compassion is not letting yourself off the hook, but rather accepting your humanness in spite of things not being perfect. Wow. I mean, is there a better quote for what we have all been through this entire year? Things are not perfect. Things have not gone according to plan. Our assumptive world has been shattered. Let yourself off the hook. Give yourself that grace and accept, even though you are the best nurse, caregiver, boarding care home owner, doctor, hospice clinician, caregiver for a family member, accept that you are human. So Martin Seligman is the kind of guru and founder of the positive psychology movement. And he makes a really important distinction between happiness and well-being. So he talks about this idea that if we live with the ideal of a happiness principle as our focus, we're really just focusing on increasing our happiness and our satisfaction while trying to eliminate everything that distracts from our happiness. So it makes sense, right? We all want to be happy. So we do everything that makes us happy, and we eliminate the things that don't make us happy. So the flaw with that is when we do that, it's basically impossible. And we've lived that over the last 10 to 12 months. You know, our world, we can't control everything that happens in our world. So it's crucial that we look into our well-being versus our happiness. And again, it's about that relationship with our thoughts and our feelings. So he talks about this sense of well-being versus this sense of happiness is just not about having positive emotions, but it's also about a life that includes engagement, includes relationships, includes meaning and purpose, and includes accomplishment. So these things will not always be easy. Our world will not always be perfect. And our world won't always be happy. Yet through even these hard times, we can still focus on our own well-being. So there are moments of devastation and despair. We've all felt them over the past several months. But a strong sense of well-being will allow us to sit with those emotions and have confidence that they are not a failure and that we are not a failure. This is simply a part of life. They are storms we will weather with faith in our ability to survive. So take a moment today, remember self-compassion, create your own personal self-care plan, whether it's just that unclenching your jaw, releasing the tension in your shoulders, taking a breath, listening to a podcast, taking a bubble bath, taking a walk outside in nature, whatever that may be, find things that you can practice every single day. And remember to be well to yourself and to everyone else. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I want to end on time so we have a chance for a few questions. References are in the PowerPoint that you can download that should be on your main bar there. And I'm going to turn it back to you, Kim, for questions.
Well, Becky, I can't tell you how outstanding that was, and we're getting lots of positive feedback already and more to come, I'm sure. So at this time, if you have questions for our presenter, please go ahead and type them into the chat box. And before we begin that Q&A session, I just want to remind everyone that if we do run a little bit past 12:30, you are welcome to remain online, but if you need to leave, you can. Just remember that if you're getting CE credit, you have to be online for a full 60 minutes from the time you logged on till the time you leave. I also want to take this opportunity once again to thank our sponsors, O'Connor Mortuary, Care Choices Hospice and Palliative Services, Caring Companions at Home, and Irvine Clinical Research, as well as, of course, Alzheimer's Orange County. One other thing is just a reminder of our webinar, free webinar next month is Caring Communication Strategies in Dementia Care. Always a popular topic. That takes place on Tuesday, March 9th, if you want to make a note of it. And of course, our webinar coordinator, Laura Bronson, is always fabulous at keeping us posted on all of that. She'll be sending that out. And I'll be the presenter for that one. So again, Caring Communication Strategies in Dementia Care on March 9th. What else? Well, let's open up the question box and see what we have. Okay, it started out with a thank you. As a retired healthcare chaplain with a focus on end-of-life care, thank you for noting that closure is not part of grief. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's, we want it, right? We could, as we talked about, like sitting in that suffering and this retired hospice chaplain knows very well, sitting with someone who is suffering can be very emotional as well, and it takes a lot for us to hold that sacred space, yet knowing that, and I don't think we would ever want to, for those of us who have had someone we love deeply die, we don't ever want to stop grieving, because we want that person with us, we want that memory with us, yet knowing that the edges of that pain can soften over time, and we take those precious joyful moments with us. That's still grief, it just looks differently from how it did maybe at those first couple of years.
Absolutely. Thank you, Becky. Although there's been acknowledgement of how the pandemic compounds grief, I'm not hearing or seeing anything about how the pandemic-induced isolation actually does impact grieving and how we can support isolated people who are grieving. Great question.
That is a great question. Those are the things that I think it's what can I do if I can't physically sit with you? Is it handwriting notes? I was just talking with one of a woman who works for Meals on Wheels, and one of the things that her some of her volunteers are doing for the isolated homebound seniors, because that was such a big part of their role, is actually to go into the home and visit with them and bring the food, and that's changed. And I think that's the thing that has been so difficult for those of us who are in the helping profession, is that how we did things a year ago, many times we can't do. So one of the things is focus on what can we do? Can it be the handwritten notes that we're dropping off? And I mean, when we talk about positivity and finding that benefit finding in grief, those little handwritten notes, again, I mean, gosh, when did people just kind of stopped handwriting things, right? It was like an email or a text, or but those phone calls, there are groups that are volunteering to help people figure out how to do Zoom so they can connect with one another. Those handwritten notes, make a phone call, say, if you're a person of faith, hey, you know what, I said a special prayer for you today at this. There are so many things that we can do to let people know we are with them, even though we can't physically be with them. It's hard, it's different. I mean, we've had to experience that with having to change the way we do funerals and not being able to have big gatherings, but maybe doing a procession through the individual's neighborhood, or having box lunches with the person's favorite food there. So really being creative and thinking outside of the box of how we can come alongside somebody who is like isolated. And it was really interesting in talking with my friend who works for Meals on Wheels, is how much the volunteers actually get out of dropping off those notes. And we were talking about how it's like they are less isolated because they're feeling like they're giving back to others.
What about bereavement groups? Do we have virtual groups now, Becky, available?
We do, and I have to say, that's another one of these silver linings. So many of our hospice and our faith communities and our hospitals very quickly moved to online support groups. And the great thing about that is we've been able to reach even more people. I mean, sometimes there were issues with driving or not being able to get from point A to point B, and having these virtual support groups has really allowed even more people to participate. And support groups are not for everyone either. There are other Sometimes people need one-on-one counseling, and almost every therapist out there is doing, telemedicine. If any of you have done telemedicine with your healthcare provider, it's the same thing. You're in your individual counseling, but it's virtual versus in person. So I have my email on the screen. There are a lot of resources happy to share with people if you're looking for particular support out there.
And I would add too that we have a bereavement group that's specific to those who have lost someone to a dementia. So that information is on our website, and you're invited to explore that as well. So thank you, Becky. The next one is a personal question from a caregiver. He states that he lost a wife in '85, a girlfriend in '86, and a second wife in 2019. A friend died of COVID 2 weeks ago. He's been through 6 sessions of one-on-one counseling, has a volunteer job, and is both hopeful and feeling hopeless. Has done meditation and is now on biofeedback using Muse. He's writing a book with a colleague. He's currently providing friendship to someone who just had a double lung transplant and then COVID. When I hear his songs, see a movie, etc., I still fall apart. Any suggestions would be helpful. By the way, I'm still wearing my wedding ring, and he's real good at counseling others.
Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, my condolences to you on all of your losses. That is, you are experiencing so much grief and so many losses over such a short period of time. Yet, my suggestion to you is, wow. I mean, I am amazed at what you just wrote, and thank you for being vulnerable enough to share this. And by the very fact that you chose to share this and we're talking about it, you're helping others. And I think you're living this. I don't know that I could add any suggestions other than what you're already doing. I mean, you're doing exactly what we talked about. You can feel both hopeful and hopeless at the same time, and you can have moments where you're feeling like you're giving back, and you're using your grief to write this book. You're using your experience not to compare it to what others are experiencing, yet to say, I don't know your unique grief, yet I know my pain, and if I can help you, if I can be there for you, I will be. You're volunteering. Wear your wedding ring. I think people sometimes get hung up on should I or shouldn't I do things. I think when we get concerned is when people are isolating and doing nothing else. Maybe clothes are still in the closet, yet you are volunteering, you're writing a book, you're in a support group, you're getting out, you're doing things. If you were saying to me, I'm frozen. I can't leave my house. I can't do any of my activities that I used to do. Then I would be concerned. But I like, you. I am sorry for what you're going through. Yet keep doing the work you're doing. And allow yourself to feel all of the emotions.
I agree. I think you're very brave, and you're leaning into your grief and doing so much for others at the same time. And please know we're here for you, and reach out to us on our helpline anytime that you want to talk. Moving on, this is from a board and care owner operator, and he's sharing that we face different ways of grief as a result of dealing with different cultures. So is there any ideal route or rule we should follow to handle such circumstances, particularly during the pandemic? That's a great question, and I don't know if you have some resources around that, Becky?
That is a great question. And, for all of you who are on this call, who are board and care owners, you all do such a fantastic job already. We talked about the cues that you're looking for when you're coming alongside someone who is grieving may look a little bit different, especially if people have limited verbal communication. Yet I would say, in a case where you're wondering about grief and someone's culture, if you can't ask the person, ask a family member. I think it's important to know, especially when it comes to maybe a boarding care home where you have people from many cultures. I've never found anyone who is offended by me asking, tell me. We can't be the experts on every single culture, but we can be curious. And so being able to ask a family, tell me about your death rituals in your culture. Tell me about your grieving rituals. And again, just by the sheer fact that you're interested and you're coming alongside, that's going to mean more to the family and to the person than anything. Does that make sense? Does that make sense, Kim?
Yeah, I think it does. And I'm not going to comment further because I was reading other questions, so um, I didn't catch everything that you said, but I think you covered it covered that well. Thank you.
And I'll just say one last thing on that, and include other residents in your home too, because again, grief is unique and it does look different based on people's culture. So explaining to other people in the home that, well, you may do it this way, this is really important for this resident to do it this way, and it's okay.
As I said, I didn't hear everything you said, but did you mention any specific resources around cultural things or?
I do have some from Dr. Bill Hoy, who
Okay.
I know many of you know as well, that if people want to email me, I can share those with you.
That's great. Thank you, Becky. I did get a little distracted because there's so many compliments in the chat box. I was just sort of, yeah, you'll get a chance to see some of those at a later date. But here is a great question. All of these are just fabulous. Is there such a thing as grief guilt, where you feel that you're not grieving enough?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That is a great question. Either you're not grieving enough, or maybe you're not grieving the way that you think you're supposed to grieve. And I think another area of grief guilt is, am I grieving the wrong thing? Right? I've had a death loss, and maybe I have macular degeneration and I'm losing my eyesight. And at the moment, losing my eyesight is my primary grief that I'm grieving right now, because it means I'm not going to be able to drive, and it's going to mean that there are many things that I'm going to have to shift in my life. So it's not that death loss isn't important to me, but at this moment in time. And so, yes, absolutely. And that's something we have to work through with ourselves. And I think that's part of that, like feeling all of the emotions and not labeling them. So I could be feeling a moment of joy today. You know what? I could wake up and yes, I'm grieving and I have this loss, but I feel pretty good today and I'm laughing and it's good to get out of the house and I'm enjoying a sunshine day or a rainy day. But now I feel guilty about it. And, again, try to not label those feelings and just accept them.
Good, excellent. More on negative emotions. A griever in my group yesterday, so I assume that's a support group, expressed how angry she is at COVID. She feels her mother did not get adequate care for her non-COVID illness because of the COVID restrictions. Other than validating and normalizing, whoops, I just lost the question. What could I have said to help her? So did I read the whole thing?
Gosh, yeah, that's a great question. That is a great question. And when the other person who talked about the isolation, I think that's another layer. When we talk about what this pandemic has done is it's been unfair. This isn't how it should have been. I should have been able to be with my person, or I should have, the hospital should have done this. There is so much anger surrounding how people have died. I think you're doing exactly what you're doing is great. I think the other suggestion that I would have is is to ask, to say what has been, what's been the hardest part for you? What made you the angriest? Being that again, it takes a lot of our energy. That's why self-care is so important, because you're going to ask the question and be prepared to sit back and wait for the answer, and it could be 45 minutes later. Yet, asking um, just probing questions, tell me a little bit more about that. What, how are you doing right now? How would you have liked it to be different? And just kind of being that person who is willing to be that safe harbor for her to express that anger.
Absolutely. Yeah. I lost my mother last year, January 1, 2020, and never got to grieve due to the pandemic hitting. Thanks for the
Hmm.
reading on self-compassion. Um, how do we deal with the guilt of not being able to be with friends at the funeral service as someone we cared about? And it feels like you sort of answered that, Becky, with the notes and
Hmm.
calls and
Yeah, it is, but it's so interesting, isn't it? Because when we think about funerals, or I like to call them ceremony, marking the death, whether you want to call it a funeral, a celebration of life, a memorial,
Mhm.
it's we think about how important it is for the grievers to mark that death. Um, Yet when we haven't been able to physically be present with our friends and family to support our grievers, it's foreign to us. It doesn't seem right.
Yeah,
It doesn't seem right. And so that's how, just like supporting those people who are isolated, the same thing. We have to look for other creative ways. I mean, we've had people who sit in their cars in the parking lots. They can't physically be in because of the number of people, yet they're in the car in the parking lot, and they turn their lights on when the family comes out, just as a moment to say, you know what, I can't physically be with you, but I'm with you. Know that I am with you. And the ability to webcast so many of these ceremonies has really been a godsend to families to know that even people are not physically there with them. They are they're virtually watching, they're virtually there. And again, those notes, those phone calls, that special story that you can share, um, people understand, and the grievers feel guilty too. They wish they could open it up to everybody and have more people there. So the fact that you're reaching out and you're saying, I wish I could be there and I can't, and
yeah,
I'm here, really means the world to them.
right. And I mean, it is the time of COVID, I mean, I just had a family member die and people did go to a church for the service and
Yeah.
there was COVID that
Hmm.
as a result of people gathering. So, I mean, people have to take care of themselves and say, I would love to be there, but my doctor
Yeah.
has asked, and it's not safe to travel and all of those things,
Exactly.
and it's
And it's a
hard.
mindset shift for us. It's changing that mindset from I can't be there. I'm not a good friend because I can't be there, and switching that mindset and saying, I can't do this, but what can I do?
Right,
Here's
right.
what I can do. And I think when we focus on what we can do in the moment, that really helps us.
Absolutely. I'm just looking at the time. My gosh, it's 20 till. Let's take just one more question and then Becky has kindly agreed. We can't get to all the questions. There's so many, but you have her email. Your email is there, and you can reach out to her.
Yes.
Uh, can Can you please help? Uh, can you please talk about what children need from adults/teachers when they're grieving? What
Oh
is one
gosh.
suggestion you can give to teachers who have a grieving student in the class? So now we're sort of getting out of the older adults realm. So
Yeah, that is a topic all in itself. It really is. I think the best thing all of us can do, all of especially teachers can do, is when we talked about being aware of other people's grief and allowing them to grieve. Teachers can be that person. And I have friends who are teachers, and they've talked with me about, it's heartbreaking, these 10-year-old kids saying, oh, I have so much anxiety, or, and they're grieving the fact that their world has changed. And, they may have had a death loss. They may have had, a parent who has lost a job. There are so many things, but, I feel like I keep repeating this, but really being that safe harbor for children, and letting them express it, letting them know, because so many times I think kids feel like they have to keep it bottled up and they can't talk about it. I also have a couple of really great resources if this person wants to email me on children in grief, as specifically related to the pandemic too, that I would be happy to share with everybody.
Thank you so much to our speaker today, Becky Lamaka, Director of Grief Support and Education with O'Connor Mortuary. As we end, once again, I thank our sponsors, O'Connor Mortuary, Care Choices, Hospice and Palliative Services, Caring Companions at Home, and Irvine Clinical Research. Be sure and join us next month when we'll be talking about caring communication strategies in dementia care on Tuesday, March 9th, 2021. As I end the webinar for all of us, your survey will pop up. And again, you need to complete that within 24 hours. And we thank you all for your attentiveness today and your ongoing participation in our monthly webinar services, our presentations. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day. Thank you again, Becky Lamaka.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.